A woman's voice, a king's wrath, a faith that would set an empire of stone and dogma ablaze. In the labyrinthine corridors of Tudor power, where shadows clung to every secret, one woman dared to walk alone, her path illuminated not by royal favor, but by the forbidden fire of her own conviction. Was it magnificent bravery, or was it high treason? Her name, etched forever in the grim records of the court, was Anne Askew. She was no duchess, no countess, yet her story would eclipse those of many who wore coronets. Born in 1521 into the damp green lands of Lincolnshire, she was the daughter of Sir William Askew, a man of property, a loyal knight of the crown. In an age where a woman's mind was considered a garden to be left untended, Anne's was cultivated. She was given the rare gift of education. But knowledge for Anne was never a passive ornament. It was a lens, a key, and ultimately a weapon. Through the delicate script of forbidden texts, she discovered a world beyond the incense-choked cathedrals and Latin chants. She found a direct path to God, one that required no priest, no gilded icon, only the stark, powerful words of the Bible itself. She embraced the nascent fires of Protestantism with the fervor of a true believer. At the heart of her newfound faith was a dangerous, seismic rejection. She denied transubstantiation, the sacred Catholic doctrine that the bread and wine of the Eucharist mystically transformed into the literal flesh and blood of Christ. To question this was not merely a theological debate. Under King Henry VIII's volatile religious settlement, codified in the 1539 Act of 6 Articles, it was a crime punishable by the most agonizing death imaginable, burning at the stake. Her words, sharp and clear as glass, cut through the ambiguity of the era. "I would rather read 5 lines in the Bible," she declared coolly during a harrowing examination, her gaze meeting that of her accusers without a flicker of fear, "than hear 5 masses in the church." These were not the careless ramblings of a misguided woman. They were calculated detonations, aimed directly at the foundations of Tudor religious policy. Each syllable was a challenge. By 1545, the whispers from Lincolnshire had grown into a roar that echoed through the grimy, bustling streets of London. Anne was no longer just a country gentlewoman with radical ideas. She was a preacher. In clandestine gatherings, in the homes of sympathetic merchants and reform-minded artisans, her voice, articulate and dangerously persuasive, drew followers. Her presence was a magnet, pulling the curious and the devout out of the shadows. This rising flame did not go unnoticed. It caught the cold, watchful eyes of Bishop Stephen Gardiner and the formidable Lord Chancellor Thomas Wriothesley. To these men, the architects and fierce guardians of Henry's fragile, Catholic-leaning orthodoxy, Anne was not a lost sheep to be gently guided back to the flock. She was a wolf, a subversive force threatening to tear the entire tapestry of the state apart. To them, her heresy was far more than a spiritual failing. By openly defying the Church's core tenets, she was implicitly undermining the king's authority as its supreme head. In their paranoid, politically charged world, this was sedition. Her crime was not just against God, but against the crown. The matter was dangerously complicated by the swirling currents of court politics. Queen Catherine Parr, Henry's 6th and final wife, was known to have evangelical sympathies, and a circle of ladies-in-waiting around her shared those leanings. Was Anne connected to them? Did this provincial woman's defiance have roots in the Queen's own household? The very question was poison. The order was given. Anne Askew was arrested. After a grueling interrogation, where her sharp intellect and biblical knowledge confounded her questioners, she was unexpectedly released. But the reprieve was fleeting. The hunters were not finished. They came for her again, and this time, the gates of the Tower of London would swing shut behind her with chilling finality. Deep beneath the formidable stone sentinel of the tower, in chambers untouched by sunlight and filled with the stale air of forgotten screams, Anne Askew was dragged into a living nightmare. Here, the law was a twisted thing, and mercy was a forgotten language. What followed was an act of state-sponsored violence so profoundly shocking, it sent a tremor through a land already calloused by the spectacle of public death. She had already been tried. She had already been condemned for heresy. Her fate was sealed. The pyre at Smithfield was waiting. But her silence was a fortress her inquisitors could not breach. They demanded names, the names of other women, noble ladies at court, who shared her forbidden faith. They wanted to know if the Queen's circle was a nest of heretics, and Anne gave them nothing but scripture and defiance. Frustrated and enraged, Chancellor Thomas Wriothesley and Sir Richard Rich, two of the most powerful men in the kingdom, took a step that plunged them into infamy. They decided to personally oversee the torture of a condemned gentlewoman, an act not only of dubious legality, but of extraordinary, unprecedented cruelty. The very men who were supposed to uphold the king's justice would now become his torturers. The instrument of their will was the rack. It was a monstrous wooden frame, a mechanism of pure agony designed to stretch a human body until joints popped from their sockets. It was a tool of terror, rarely used on women. Bound by her wrists and ankles, Anne felt the ropes bite into her flesh as the wheel began to turn. A searing, blinding pain exploded through her, as her shoulders and hips were violently dislocated. Her own words, smuggled out and recorded by the chronicler John Bale, paint a horrifying picture. "Then they did put me on the rack," she wrote, "because I confessed no ladies or gentlewomen to be of my opinion." She described Wriothesley and Rich, their fine courtiers' clothes no doubt stained with sweat, turning the terrible wheel with their own hands, their faces contorted with effort and fury. "And so they did use me till my bones and joints were plucked asunder, in such sort as I was not able to stand." Even in that vortex of agony, as her body was systematically destroyed, her spirit remained an impregnable citadel. She offered them no names, no confessions, no betrayals. Torture, though technically illegal without a royal warrant, had become a shadow instrument of Tudor power. In Anne's case, it was raw, naked persecution. They were not seeking truth. They were seeking ammunition to use against their political rivals, perhaps even the Queen herself. But Anne's resolve only hardened in the crucible of her suffering. "I had rather to die," she would later write, her hand guided by another as she could no longer hold a pen, "than to break my faith." Her defiance transformed her. She was no longer just a heretic. She was a symbol of unshakable conviction, a testament to a faith that could withstand the utter ruin of the body. When they were finally finished, she was a broken ruin of a woman, unable to move, unable to stand. They carried her, a mangled but still breathing effigy of defiance, back to her cold cell. The rack had failed. All that remained was the fire. She could not walk. The sinews and joints that had once carried her with purpose were now just a landscape of pain. On July 16, 1546, they carried Anne Askew to her own death in a simple wooden chair. Her body, shattered by the rack, was a testament to the state's cruelty. Her will, serene and unshaken, was a testament to its failure. The place was Smithfield, a muddy field outside London's walls, long consecrated by the blood and ash of those deemed enemies of the faith. This execution, however, felt different. A palpable tension hung in the humid summer air, thicker than the usual stench of the city. Anne Askew was not the only one to die that day. 3 other men, John Lascelles, John Hadlam, and John Hemley, were condemned to the same fiery fate. Yet all eyes, from the nobles on their raised platform to the jeering commoners packed behind barriers, were fixed on the woman in the chair. She was a spectacle of contradictions, the first Englishwoman known to have endured the rack in the Tower only to be then burned at the stake. Whispers of her ordeal had slithered through the city's taverns and alleyways. The brutality of it had shocked even the jaded populace of London. Now they had come to see the final act, public, irreversible, and designed to instill terror. They lifted her broken form from the chair and chained her to the central stake. Her body was so frail they had to construct a small wooden seat to prop her up, preventing her from slumping into the pyre before the flames could do their work. Executioners, their faces grim and businesslike, stacked bundles of dry wood and tarred faggots around her, a macabre nest for the coming inferno. Eyewitnesses, whose accounts would later form the bedrock of her legend, described her demeanor as eerily calm, almost tranquil. She seemed a universe away from the grim proceedings. Bishop Nicholas Shaxton, a man who had once shared her reformist views but had recanted to save his own life, was positioned on a pulpit to deliver a sermon. He preached of heresy and damnation, his voice ringing out over the silent crowd. Anne, however, paid him no mind. She simply looked forward, her lips unmoving, her silence a more powerful sermon than any he could offer. As a final, twisted act of mercy, a bag of gunpowder was tied around her neck. The hope was that the explosion would bring a swifter end than suffocation, or the slow consumption by fire. A torch was brought forth. The executioner knelt. As the first licks of flame caught the dry kindling, a hush fell over the thousands gathered to watch. In Tudor England, burnings were theater, a visceral performance of power meant to purge the kingdom of dissent. But as the smoke billowed and the flames surged, something unintended happened. Instead of erasing her, the fire was forging her into a legend. Anne Askew died without a single word of confession, without a hint of betrayal, without a flicker of fear. Her writings, meticulously preserved in the Examinations of Anne Askew, became wildfire, spreading through the underground networks of Protestant reformers across England and the continent. The Protestant martyrologist John Foxe would later immortalize her story in his influential Acts and Monuments, declaring that she was, quote, burned for the testimony of Jesus. The message sent by the crown that day was one of terror and absolute authority. The state could seize your body, break it upon its instruments, and consume it in fire. But the message received by thousands was entirely different. It was a story of defiance. It showed that the state's power had a limit. It could not touch the soul. It could not break true conviction. Anne's agony became a damning indictment of a religious policy so brutal it had to make war on the conscience of a single unyielding woman. At Smithfield, amidst the crackle of flames and the acrid smell of smoke, Anne Askew's earthly suffering came to a close. But from those very ashes, a powerful and haunting testament arose. Her ordeal was not merely a personal tragedy. It was a glaring spotlight on the lethal struggle between conscience and power that defined the Tudor age. It exposed the raw brutality of authority and, in the same searing light, the astonishing resilience of the human spirit. Her story echoes through the centuries, a permanent question mark hanging over the relationship between state power and individual faith. As Anne herself had written, in a moment of clarity that would define her life and death, I would rather to die than to break my faith. And so she did.